Hi and welcome back to the channel. And on today's episode, let's do some maintenance. So it has been a little while since I've had a chance to do a mechanical video. Most of the videos lately have been on location at motorsport events, and got a couple more of those coming through. Anyway, back in the workshop now, and picked a great day to do this because the neighbours around us are making a fair racket with cutting and grinding and hammering, so hopefully a lot of that doesn't come through in the video, but if it does, apologies now. Let's get onto the mechanical stuff here, and yes, I have done a lot of videos on building rally cars, and now it's time to look at actually maintaining them, because once you start racing them, they aren't just like a normal road car where you can set and forget them. They need to be constantly looked after. Maintaining a rally or race car is as critical as building it. You've got to get it right, because the big thing here to remember is entry fees are not cheap into any form of motorsport. You've generally got to get yourself to an event, and fuel and tyres, perhaps accommodation and all the other bits and pieces. So the last thing you want is for the car to break down somewhere on the event, especially over effectively a lack of maintenance. And if I had $1 for every time that I'd seen a competitor over the years do that, well, I wouldn't be here making these videos now. The amount of people, and it still surprises me to this day, that don't perform maintenance on their competition car, whether it be minor things or whether it be major, or maybe they don't have the mechanical knowledge, and those things crop up, and then in an event, a small part or a simple maintenance item ends up being a big failure, which either causes a lot of damage or causes costs, and they're out of the event. So let's go through today and see what it is that we would normally do on a rally car before each event, to make sure that they're ready to go and get through the events okay. So let's start under the engine bay. It's a pretty good place to start. It's at the front of the car. Now, most road cars, as a general rule of thumb, every 10,000 kilometres or 6 months or thereabouts, you service the engine. Change the oil, and plugs generally don't get changed for a very long time, sometimes 100,000 Ks. Now, that's fine for a road car. However, rally cars are not really driven the same way as a road car. At least I hope most people don't drive their road cars the same way. They are on very rough roads. They are often very dusty, muddy, or even wet, as the last rally. And therefore, the engine is subjected to a lot more pressure and stress than it would normally go through. And the same thing happens for the oil that's inside the engine and a lot of the mechanical parts. Therefore, race cars and rally cars need a lot more maintenance than a standard road car. My rule of thumb is every 100 kilometres competitive. So for state championship rallies in WA, that's once a rally. And for clubmen that do roughly half the distance every 2 rallies, change the oil. Now, there's many different opinions on oils out there, and I'm not going to get into that on this video. We use good quality synthetic oil, and it's changed every second rally for clubmen and every rally in this car. And also a brand new filter goes on as well. And the trick here is to use good quality components. Now, I know a lot of people would argue, well, how come I need to change it so regularly? That's a waste of money on oil. Is it? By the time the oil gets black and dirty, or it's got particles like, say, dust suspended in the oil is wearing out the engine and not doing its job. So therefore, changing the oil is, as far as I'm concerned, cheap insurance. Now, spark plugs, if this was a WRX engine, it would have platinum spark plugs in it, which are rated to last 100,000 Ks. So obviously, we don't want to change those spark plugs every rally, certainly not platinum ones anyway. However, what we do with the Subaru engines, and in fact all the engines, is change the spark plugs at the same time that we do the oil changes, and therefore we find a copper equivalent of the platinum or iridium spark plugs that go in there and change those over. Now, I've already replaced the spark plugs in this engine, and I've done the oil change and filter on it already, so we know it's good to go. Also, air filter in there as well to make sure that the air filter is clean. Filtration problems. One of the reasons for checking or cleaning the air filter very regularly is it gives you an indication of what the engine has been ingesting, what it's breathing in. If you take the air filter off and find there's dust or mud or water in the intake, it means that has passed through the air filter and is potentially going to end up in the engine. And if you find there's a lot of dust or mud or whatever inside the air filter and it has got into the inlet track, then you need to have a good look at your air filtration system to try and work out a better way to keep that debris out, because engines certainly don't cope very well with being particularly dusted. However, water and mud is no good for them either. So also check of the brake fluid to make sure that that's okay, and we'll talk more about the brakes later on, and the same with the clutch fluid if you've got a hydraulic clutch. Radiator to make sure the coolant levels are good and there's no problem there, same with the overflow bottle, and also the power steering level to make sure that fluid hasn't leaked out. And just some quick checks like that can give you an indication straight away of whether you need to investigate further and find some other problems in there. And in this case, all the levels are good, which is perfect. However, if one of these levels was low for some reason or lower than it should be, it then warrants some more checking to find out what's going on there. Fuel filter, I've talked about fuel systems before. With these, generally once a year we change the fuel filter in the car. However, if it's been a particularly dusty year, we'll change the fuel filter halfway through the season just to make sure that it is getting proper fuel pressure. That is slightly more critical in turbocharged engines than it is in the naturally aspirated engine. However, same thing applies, so we just keep a good close eye on it. Also, underneath the airbox here is a dipstick for the transmission, so we just check the transmission oil level as well and make sure that that hasn't given us any trouble. All right, so that's the engine sorted out. Let's get underneath and have a look. Obviously we've already got the wheels off this and we've been right through it. Starting with the brakes first, to have a look, make sure the pads are in good condition, that the rotors are okay. They've got some very light scoring on there, but it's nothing to write home about yet. That's all okay. All the suspension components are okay. Bushes, make sure there's no play in any of the steering, in the wheel bearings, that the struts and suspension looks okay. All the brake lines are in good condition. One thing that's very common, particularly in Australia or Western Australia, is the stones, the gravel is very fine, and it's very easy for small stones to end up in the brake systems, particularly in the rear, but we do get them in the front as well. They get in the vents, they get trapped around the calipers and around the brake pads, so it's quite often a good idea just to take the calipers off and give them a bit of a shake out, and also have a good spin of the rotors and just make sure there's no loose stones in there. I have seen stones get wedged into the vents or the slots and also jammed in the brake pads as well, and then that causes the brake pads to become damaged and it can damage the rotors. It scores it all out, and the stones act like an abrasive and grind away at the pads. So this is all pretty good, which like I said, we've already been through it all. So let's have a look at the rear. Same deal at the rear. Now, we are going to change these rear pads. They are actually not very old, and this is another thing that as part of the maintenance program that we do, is when things need development or changing, say a driver or myself finds something's not quite right with the car, or we could see some improvement, then the opportunity while you've got the car in pieces doing the maintenance is a chance to get that sorted out. So in this particular case, it's got some very grippy front pads in it, which is great. It's got race front pads. However, the rear pads, because these are not heavy on rear brakes, has got a different compound pad in it. And we trialled this to see how it would go, and we're finding that the fronts are locking up and the rears are not providing enough assistance, and that's coming down to the compounds in the pads. So we are going to change these pads out and sort the rotors out at the same time, and put in a grippier race pad in the rear so that the pads are evenly matched, which will help to balance the brakes out. The next step from that, if that doesn't sort out the issue, is to then change the whole braking system over. I did that on the WRX we built in the shed last year, and go to a completely different brake setup and run a brake bias valve, which will then allow us to adjust the braking effort in the car. Also, for those that are sharp-eyed, there is a fair bit of mud still here. Yes, we do have to clean all this mud off. Basically, at the moment, what we've done is we've done what's called a preliminary clean, where we've got it back from a rally, and the last rally was extremely muddy and drove through lakes there. And so there's still a fair bit of mud in places that we hadn't been able to get the pressure cleaner into. So what we'll do is get it outside and pressure clean it properly to reduce all this mud, or remove all this mud. Righto, so underneath the sump guard is back on the car again. We have had this all off and looked under there, checked everything including the drive shafts and all of the steering and components and suspension to make sure everything's doing what it's supposed to be doing. The exhaust, make sure that there's no leaks in there, there's no damage to that exhaust, which is great. We had to put a new one on it after Forest Rally and it came off. So I'm glad to see that it's in great condition here. All these suspension arms and bushes under here to make sure. And there's an easy way to do that. We just put a lever in here and just give them a bit of a wiggle, and that will pretty quickly tell you if anything is broken or loose or any of the bushes are damaged. They're all in great condition here. Working down the car now, car is obviously not four-wheel drive, but when it was a four-wheel drive, you check the tail shaft in there to make sure that the tail shaft is okay on the bearings are fine in there, centre bearings and everything are fine. These flaps here get asked a lot what these are about. It's an old style way of doing it. We don't do it this way anymore. This was on the car when we got it, but basically these flaps here are designed to deflect stones and other debris that's thrown from the front wheels. So basically they hit these flaps here and then it should deflect it at the ground, which then provides protection for the fuel tank. The other way, which is very common, and this car's sort of got one on this side, it hasn't on the right side of the car, is a flap protecting the rear arm. Some people actually cut sheets that go right under and protect everything, including the arms in one piece. So that is something that we do need to replace. We've lost one from that side, so we'll get on and cut a new one to go there. And I think ultimately we'll probably end up changing over to the complete sheets either side there that will protect that all. Again, it depends on your personal preference with that. It's just part of the underbody protection. Moving through, check the rear arms to make sure that there's no damage to the rear arms. Also, quick check to make sure toe points and things like that are okay. Muffler, all the mounts and everything are fine there, which is all good. Also, check all the mud flaps, because that is a requirement that the vehicle has to have mud flaps. So we're all good. So underneath is all looking pretty good. One of the last things to do is to go through the interior of the car. Now, it's not that easy because I'm on the hoist at the moment, so having to get around things. The reason we go through the interior is not only just to give it a clean and a wipe over, but it's quite common because we haven't got carpets and trims and a lot of the normal seals in the car for mud or water to enter the car. Now, the last event was very wet, and so we can see stains here and there where small trickles of water have managed to get in through puddles. And the beauty of it is, because it's like a muddy stain, we can sort of follow that back to where that water has got in from and find if there's a hole or a bung there that's not sealing properly, and then just get a bit of sealant in there, or whatever it might need to be doing, put a new bung in it or a screw or a bolt or something, just to make sure that we try and keep as much water and mud out of the interior of the car as possible, and also dust, because it doesn't take very long for these things to get very dirty inside, and the more that you can keep them clean and the less dust, the less cleaning you got to do afterwards. So we've been through the rest of the car, and the last thing that we need to look at is the tyres. Now, rally tyres are definitely a black art of racing, and there's a fair bit involved in the tyres. I've done a video sometime in the past on tyres, so I'll put a link up here somewhere or in the description on how they go together. But basically what you want to check here is rally tyres are very prone to getting damage on the sidewalls. They are reinforced to help out with that. Even this tyre here, it might not show up in the camera that well, but there's some small stones stuck in the bead there of these tyres. That's not a major drama there. I'll just get a screwdriver in there and flick those little stones out. It's not going to affect the tyre at all. Also check all the tread to make sure that there's no major damage here. Rally tyres need to have a nice square edge. The tread needs to be square. As soon as that starts to get rounded, the tyres are beginning to get worn out. These tyres, being that the last event was very wet and muddy, these tyres are still good, so there's no drama with that. Also, the other big ticket with these is quite often on the back of the rim, particularly on the rear of front-wheel drive and four-wheel drive cars. A lot of mud and dirt can build up in this area here. It can actually be quite thick. Unfortunately, I didn't get a video of that. I thought I had, and then I cleaned the wheels out, and unfortunately it didn't record. I think I forgot to press record, if I'm honest, but anyway. So quite often you can get quite a thick layer of dirt in here. Sometimes it can be 20 to 30 mil of dirt built up inside there, and there can actually be several kilos of dirt inside, particularly the rear wheels. And one of the tricks to counteract that is to fit wheel scrapers to the car. In the future I'll do a video on what wheel scrapers are and how they work, but it does help to reduce the mud. However, it still doesn't eliminate it. That can do a couple of things, having all that dirt built up in there. One is it makes the car heavier, and of course we want to keep the car as light as possible from a performance point of view. Secondly, it can really affect the wheel balance. I mean, at the end of the day, generally you only have very small wheel weights that are generally put on road tyres. So imagine having, 5 to 10 kilos of mud stuck in the back of the wheel. That is a lot of extra weight, and it throws the car out of balance. It's not so bad on the tight, twisty stuff, but once you get onto the high speed and the straights, and even on liaison, say on the highway driving back to service or whatever, it really can be pretty rattly inside the car and really rattle the fillings out of your teeth. So anyway, these tyres are in good shape, and the rims are in good shape too. There's no cracks or dents in any of the rims, which is something else we'll check. So basically these can all go back on the car, and we can get the car pretty much done now. It's pretty much done, ready for the next rally. Righto. So that pretty much is the end of the maintenance side of things on this car. It's very easy in a short video of 5 or 10 minutes or whatever to show you. However, it takes a lot longer. It can easily take a couple of hours or more between events, depending on how much cleaning is required after an event. And hopefully I've showed you some of the stuff here that would save you a lot of trouble if you are racing yourself, particularly as, like I said earlier, some very small things can turn into large dramas on a rally. Thanks very much for watching. I'd also like to thank everyone that's been giving us great feedback as well, our subscribers and just our rally community and people in general that I've seen on rallies. Thank you very much for the feedback. It's very encouraging. Yes, I know I would like to get round to making these videos on a more regular basis. Have got plenty of other things going on, not just in the workshop and motorsport and things like that. Some of it we filmed, and we'll get round to getting videos together for it, and others it's just purely running out of time on occasion. So sorry about that, and hopefully I can improve that in the near future. Please give us a thumbs up and subscribe, and I'll catch you again soon. Cheers.